Ethan and Grace thought swapping partners would reignite their fading marriage, but one night of temptation turned their suburban dream into a blood-soaked nightmare. Marcus and Lena had always been the kind of couple others envied. They had a charming home in the suburbs, a friendly circle of neighbors, and the appearance of a perfect life. But beneath that calm surface, something had begun to crack. The laughter that once filled their evenings had been replaced with routine silence. The warmth of their marriage had slowly faded into habit. Marcus worked long hours as an electrician, often returning home too tired to talk, while Lena spent her days managing a small boutique in town, pretending everything was fine. Both felt the distance growing, but neither wanted to admit it aloud. It was easier to act like things were still good than to face the truth that they were drifting apart. One evening, while scrolling through her phone, Lena stumbled upon an online forum discussing unconventional ways to reignite passion in relationships. It was filled with people sharing bold ideas, from spontaneous vacations to secret fantasies. But one particular topic caught her attention: the couple swap game. The idea was simple yet shocking. Two consenting couples temporarily exchanging partners to bring excitement back into their relationships. Most comments described it as liberating, thrilling, even life-changing. Lena's heart raced as she read through the stories. It sounded reckless, but part of her couldn't stop imagining what it would feel like to try something so daring. That night, Marcus noticed her distracted stare but didn't ask why. His mind was elsewhere too, weighed down by bills and exhaustion. Lena debated for days before mentioning what she had found. When she finally told Marcus about the idea, his reaction was disbelief mixed with curiosity. At first, he thought she was joking, but as she explained, her tone was serious, almost excited. He resisted the thought, calling it insane, but the seed had been planted. The more he thought about it, the more it tempted him. Their marriage had become predictable, and deep down, Marcus wondered if this dangerous experiment might somehow fix what they had lost. After days of silence, Marcus agreed to look into it. Just for curiosity's sake, they joined a private online group where other couples posted introductions and shared rules. Most of the members were ordinary people, teachers, office workers, small business owners who led normal lives but sought secret thrills behind closed doors. Soon, a message appeared from a couple named Darren and Kayla. They seemed confident, experienced, and charming in their words. Darren was a personal trainer, while Kayla described herself as an artist who loved adventure. Their profile photo showed them smiling, looking like the kind of couple who had it all. Conversations started casual but quickly grew more personal. The four exchanged messages for weeks, learning about each other's boundaries and expectations. Darren and Kayla appeared open and relaxed, assuring them that everything was about trust, not betrayal. Lena liked Kayla's free-spirited attitude, while Marcus admired Darren's confidence. They agreed to meet in person at a restaurant to see if there was real chemistry. On the night of the meeting, Lena spent extra time getting ready, nervous yet excited. Marcus, too, felt uneasy but curious. When they arrived, Darren and Kayla were already there. Darren had a strong presence, tall, athletic, and charismatic. Kayla was striking with a bold personality that drew attention. The four of them talked for hours over drinks, and surprisingly, the conversation flowed easily. Laughter replaced awkwardness, and the tension slowly faded. Marcus found himself intrigued by Kayla's daring attitude, while Lena couldn't help but notice how Darren's gaze lingered on her. By the end of the night, the idea no longer seemed unthinkable. Driving home, Marcus and Lena felt a strange rush of excitement. They talked about how different the evening had felt, alive, unpredictable, thrilling. Lena suggested that they should take the next step and plan a weekend away together with Darren and Kayla. Marcus hesitated, but something inside him, a mix of curiosity and competitiveness, made him agree. The plan was to rent a secluded cabin by the lake, far from their town, where no one would know them. It was to be a weekend of freedom and exploration, a way to bring life back into their marriage. Neither realized how that decision would lead them into darkness. The days leading up to the trip were filled with anticipation. Lena secretly felt nervous but couldn't resist the adventure. Marcus tried to act confident, though deep down he worried about what might happen when emotions got involved. They packed for the weekend: wine, food, and clothes they wouldn't normally wear around each other. The drive to the lake was long, quiet, and tense. They reached the cabin by late afternoon, greeted by Darren's easy smile and Kayla's infectious energy. The place was perfect: wooden walls, a fireplace, and a deck overlooking the water. It seemed peaceful, yet something about the silence of the forest felt unsettling. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they opened bottles of wine and sat by the fire, laughing and talking about life, pretending it was all just a game. The atmosphere was light, filled with teasing glances and nervous laughter. But beneath that surface, emotions were building. Marcus watched Lena closely, noticing how comfortable she seemed around Darren. Kayla, meanwhile, was effortlessly confident, leaning closer to Marcus as the night went on. It all felt unreal, like stepping into another world where rules didn't exist. As the evening grew late, the group became bolder. The air was thick with tension, unspoken thoughts, and desires they had never dared to explore. For a moment, Marcus felt the spark he'd been missing for years, a sense of freedom and excitement that blurred his moral boundaries. He told himself it was just for fun, a one-time thing, but deep inside he felt uneasy. Something about Darren's calculated charm seemed off, too polished, too perfect. Kayla occasionally looked at him with a shadow of caution, as if she knew something Lena and Marcus didn't. When the night finally ended, Marcus lay awake, staring at the dark ceiling, unable to sleep. He could hear faint whispers and laughter from another room, and each sound twisted his stomach tighter. He tried to convince himself it was fine, that this was what they agreed to. But something about the situation didn't feel like a harmless adventure anymore. It felt dangerous, not because of what they had done, but because of what it might awaken in them. Outside, the wind howled across the lake, rattling the cabin windows. Marcus turned to look at Lena sleeping beside him, peaceful and unaware. For the first time, he felt like he didn't know her anymore. The woman he married seemed like a stranger. He didn't know that in just a few days, this cabin, the place they thought would bring them closer, would become a crime scene that reporters would later call one of the most shocking stories of its kind. The couple's swap game had only just begun, and before the weekend ended, someone wouldn't make it out alive. The morning sun crept through the cracks of the cabin's curtains, falling across the wooden floor where empty glasses and scattered clothes hinted at the chaos of the night before. The scent of smoke from the dying fire still lingered in the air. Marcus woke up disoriented, his head pounding, his mouth dry, and his thoughts tangled in confusion. For a few seconds he couldn't remember where he was. Then it all came back: the drinks, the laughter, the glances that went too far, the reckless decisions. He turned to look at Lena, who was already awake, sitting quietly by the window, staring out toward the lake. Her face looked calm, almost too calm, as if she was holding something back. Marcus tried to act normal, forcing a smile as he joined her, but there was a distance in her eyes that made his chest tighten. It wasn't just guilt or awkwardness. It was something else, something he couldn't name. She avoided his gaze, and that silence between them said everything words couldn't. He wondered what had happened when he drifted off the night before, but he didn't ask. He didn't want to hear the answer. Downstairs, Darren and Kayla were already making breakfast. The atmosphere felt strangely domestic, like four friends on vacation, pretending everything was fine. But beneath the surface, something invisible had shifted. The playful tone from the night before was gone. Every laugh sounded forced. Every movement carried tension. Marcus noticed how Lena and Darren exchanged quick glances, subtle but telling. Kayla noticed too. Her expression tightened whenever she caught them looking at each other. After breakfast, they all decided to go for a walk along the lakeshore to ease the tension. The water shimmered under the morning sun, peaceful and quiet, hiding the storm that was building inside them. Marcus tried to push the discomfort aside, but jealousy began to gnaw at him. He saw how Lena walked beside Darren, how naturally they seemed to move together, and it made his stomach twist. Every small touch between them felt like a betrayal. Kayla lagged behind, walking next to Marcus, silent and observant. After a while, she broke the silence, her voice low and measured, telling him that Darren had a history of taking things too far. Marcus turned to her, startled by her words. She explained that they had tried the swap game before with another couple, and it hadn't ended well. Darren, she said, liked control. He enjoyed watching others fall apart. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, trying to hide his growing unease. He wanted to dismiss what she said, to believe this was still harmless fun, but he couldn't shake the way Darren's smile never seemed to reach his eyes. Back at the cabin, the group spent the afternoon pretending to relax. They played music, grilled food on the deck, and took pictures like tourists. But every time Marcus looked at Lena, he saw the same distant expression. The woman who once used to laugh at his jokes now seemed lost in another world. He started drinking more, telling himself it would help him loosen up, but it only made his thoughts darker. Darren stayed close to Lena, his presence dominating every moment. Marcus could feel his anger simmering beneath the surface, and Kayla's warning echoed in his head like a curse. By evening, the air in the cabin had grown heavy. The sun was setting, painting the lake in streaks of red and orange. Marcus sat alone by the fire, watching the flames dance, while the others played cards at the table. He felt like an outsider in his own marriage. Lena laughed at something Darren said, a soft, genuine laugh that stabbed through him like a knife. The more he watched, the more he realized this was no longer a game for her. She was drawn to Darren in a way that frightened him. Kayla finally stood up and went to sit beside Marcus. She poured herself a drink, her hands trembling slightly. She told him that Darren had done this before, that he used charm and confidence to lure women, then push them beyond what they could handle. Marcus didn't respond, but his silence said enough. He was starting to believe her. As the night deepened, Darren suggested they go outside to the deck. The four of them sat beneath the stars, the cool air carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. They talked about meaningless things, but the tension grew thicker with each passing minute. The alcohol made everything feel blurred and unstable. Marcus felt trapped in his own thoughts, unable to escape the image of Lena smiling at another man. Kayla kept glancing at him, perhaps sensing the storm rising inside him. When Darren stood and offered Lena his hand to dance, Marcus's jaw tightened. He watched them sway under the dim porch light, their bodies too close, their movements too familiar. It was supposed to be part of the game, yet something about it felt too real. Kayla whispered that they should stop this before it got worse, but Marcus didn't move. He just sat there, gripping his glass, his knuckles turning white. Minutes turned into hours. The night air grew colder, and the laughter slowly faded. Darren and Lena disappeared into the cabin, leaving Marcus and Kayla outside in silence. The sound of the wind rustled through the trees, and in that quiet, Marcus's heart sank. He wanted to believe nothing was happening, but deep down, he already knew. Every sound coming from inside made his chest ache. Kayla stood up, pacing nervously, saying they should leave in the morning. Marcus said nothing. His mind was spinning too fast, drowning in anger and humiliation. Later, when Darren and Lena returned, their faces were flushed, their smiles forced. Kayla turned away, disgusted. Marcus stared at the fire, unable to look at them. The fragile trust that held the group together had completely broken. What had begun as curiosity had turned into something poisonous. The next day would only make it worse, but none of them realized it yet. As the fire burned low, Marcus went to bed, but sleep refused to come. His thoughts circled endlessly, memories of happier days, the laughter that used to fill their home, and the growing certainty that he had lost Lena for good. Outside, Darren's voice carried faintly through the wooden walls, calm and confident. Marcus clenched his fists, his mind clouded with anger. Kayla's earlier words echoed again, warning him of the danger he had walked into. The night felt endless. Every creak of the cabin sounded like a whisper of betrayal. Every shadow felt alive, feeding on his thoughts. By the time dawn broke, Marcus was still awake, his eyes red, his heart heavy with dread. He knew something was changing inside him, something dark that he couldn't control. The line between love and hate had blurred, and what began as a twisted game to reignite passion had turned into a slow descent toward madness. When the morning came, the cabin looked peaceful again, sunlight glinting off the calm lake. But the peace was an illusion. Beneath the smiles and polite small talk, jealousy and resentment were taking root. The couples had come to the cabin seeking excitement, but now it was only a matter of time before one of them would break. The swap that was meant to bring pleasure had become a trap, and Marcus could feel the walls closing in around him. The weekend was far from over, but the danger had already begun. The third morning began in uneasy silence. The once playful atmosphere of the cabin had turned tense and strange, as though the air itself carried something heavy and unseen. Marcus sat at the kitchen table staring into a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, his thoughts lost somewhere between rage and regret. Lena was outside by the lake, her reflection rippling on the water's surface, while Darren chopped wood nearby, his every movement sharp and deliberate. Kayla stayed inside, her eyes red from lack of sleep, moving quietly through the rooms as if afraid to disturb whatever fragile calm remained. None of them spoke much that morning, yet everything that needed to be said hung in the silence between them. Marcus couldn't look at Lena without his chest tightening. She had changed in just a few days, and not in ways he understood. The warmth he once felt toward her was gone, replaced by a hollow ache that grew every time she smiled at Darren. He told himself it was just jealousy, that things would return to normal once they went home, but deep down he knew something irreversible had happened. The trust that had once bound them was gone. Now every look, every movement felt like a betrayal. By noon a storm began forming over the lake. The once clear sky turned gray, and the wind carried a biting chill. Kayla suggested they head back into town early, but Darren insisted on staying one more night. He said it would be a shame to waste the last day they had, as if nothing was wrong at all. His confidence irritated Marcus, who was already on edge. Lena sided with Darren, saying they should enjoy their last evening together. Marcus noticed how easily she followed his lead, how she seemed drawn to his certainty. It made something inside him snap. He spent most of the afternoon drinking, pacing between the porch and the living room. Kayla watched him quietly, worry etched on her face. She tried to speak to him, to calm him down, but he brushed her off. The alcohol dulled his pain but fueled his anger. Each glance between Lena and Darren became another spark in the growing fire inside him. The laughter that drifted in from outside sounded like mockery. Every sound from them twisted deeper into his thoughts, feeding his resentment. When the rain started to fall, the others came back inside, dripping wet and laughing as if nothing was wrong. Marcus watched from the corner of the room, his jaw tight. Darren threw his wet jacket onto a chair and opened another bottle of wine, pouring glasses for everyone. He handed one to Lena, his fingers brushing hers longer than necessary. Marcus's grip on his glass tightened until it almost shattered in his hand. Kayla sensed the danger and quietly stepped between them, trying to change the subject, but the tension was already too thick to break. As thunder rolled over the lake, the lights flickered and the cabin grew darker. The wind howled through the trees, and rain slammed against the windows in steady waves. The sound filled the silence that none of them dared to break. Marcus finally stood, his eyes locked on Darren. He accused him of crossing the line, his voice low but shaking with fury. Darren smirked as if amused, and that small expression broke what little restraint Marcus had left. He lunged forward, shoving Darren hard. The two men collided with the table, knocking bottles and glasses to the floor. Kayla screamed, rushing to pull Marcus away, but the fight had already begun. The two men crashed into furniture, swinging wildly, the storm outside echoing their chaos. Lena shouted for them to stop, her voice lost in the noise. Darren was stronger, but Marcus was furious, the kind of rage that gave him a strength he didn't know he had. They stumbled toward the fireplace, slipping on the wet floor. In one violent motion, Marcus shoved Darren backward with all his strength. There was a sickening thud followed by silence. Darren's head struck the sharp edge of the stone hearth, and he fell to the ground motionless. For a second, no one moved. The only sound was the rain hammering against the roof and the fire crackling in the corner. Marcus stood frozen, his breathing ragged, staring down at Darren's body. A thin line of blood trickled across the floor, bright against the wood. Kayla covered her mouth, her eyes wide in horror. Lena dropped to her knees beside Darren, shaking him, calling his name, but he didn't respond. His skin had already begun to pale. The realization hit Marcus like a wave of ice. He stumbled backward, his body trembling. He hadn't meant for this to happen. He wanted the fight to stop, not end. But the truth was right in front of him. Darren was dead. The man who had charmed his wife and torn apart his peace now lay lifeless on the floor, and Marcus was the reason. Lena turned toward him, her face streaked with tears, her eyes filled with fear instead of love. Kayla knelt beside Darren, checking for a pulse, then shook her head slowly. Panic set in quickly. Kayla demanded they call the police, but Marcus shouted that they couldn't. He couldn't go to prison, he couldn't lose everything over one moment of rage. Lena tried to reason with him, but her voice broke into sobs. The storm outside raged louder, lightning flashing through the windows as if nature itself was bearing witness. The small cabin that had once felt like an escape now felt like a trap. Marcus paced back and forth, trying to think, but his mind was blank. Every breath he took felt like it could shatter him. Kayla repeated that they needed help, that someone had to report it, but Marcus snapped again, telling her to be quiet. His words came out cold and sharp, his eyes empty. He turned toward Lena, desperate for her to say something, to help him decide what to do. But she was frozen, staring at Darren's body in disbelief. Time passed in a blur. The fire burned low, and the storm finally began to fade. Darren's body lay still in the same spot, covered now with a blanket. The three remaining people sat in separate corners of the room, trapped in silence. None of them dared to speak about what would come next. The weight of what had happened pressed down on them like a physical force. Every tick of the clock echoed through the cabin, marking each second of their shared guilt. Outside, the rain eased into a drizzle, but the night seemed endless. Marcus felt numb, his anger drained, replaced by a hollow emptiness. He didn't know what would happen next. He only knew that their lives were already destroyed. The couple's swap game that was supposed to rekindle love had instead unleashed something dark, jealousy, obsession, and violence. As lightning flashed one last time across the lake, Marcus realized the truth. There was no undoing what he had done. The line between love and hate had vanished, and what remained was only fear. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind a stillness that felt unnatural. The lake was calm again, its surface glassy and cold, reflecting the gray sky above. The world outside the cabin seemed peaceful, but inside, everything was shattered. The body lay under a thick blanket near the fireplace, the air heavy with the faint metallic scent of blood. No one had slept. Marcus sat slumped on the couch, his eyes blank and lifeless. Lena sat on the floor near the window, her knees pulled to her chest, staring out at the water without blinking. Kayla paced across the room, trembling with rage and panic, her every step echoing through the wooden walls. The silence was unbearable. Every creak of the cabin seemed louder than usual, every sound sharper. None of them wanted to move, but they all knew something had to be done. Marcus kept replaying the moment in his mind, the fight, the sound of Darren's head hitting the fireplace, the sudden quiet afterward. He wanted to believe it was an accident, but the guilt twisting inside him said otherwise. He knew the police wouldn't see it as self-defense. There had been no weapon, no threat, just anger, raw and uncontrollable. Kayla was the first to break the silence. Her voice shook as she said they needed to go to the authorities to report what had happened before things got worse. Marcus looked up at her, his expression hollow, and told her they couldn't. His voice was low, almost calm, but his eyes carried the edge of desperation. He said no one would believe it was an accident, that they'd all go to prison. Lena tried to speak, but her voice came out weak and broken. The fear in her tone only deepened the dread filling the room. Kayla refused to listen. She grabbed her bag, saying she was leaving, that she couldn't stay there another second. Marcus blocked her path, standing in front of the door with his hands shaking. He told her she wasn't thinking straight, that she'd ruin everything if she went to the police. His words made her step back, realizing how far gone he was. The man who had once seemed quiet and kind now looked dangerous, consumed by guilt and fear. Lena begged him to let her go, but he wouldn't move. His mind was spiraling, trapped between panic and survival. The hours dragged by in suffocating silence. The daylight faded into dusk, and shadows stretched long across the cabin walls. Marcus eventually decided they had to hide the body. He said it was the only way to fix things, the only way to protect themselves. Lena stared at him in disbelief, unable to find her voice. Kayla stood frozen, horrified by his plan. But Marcus was no longer reasoning. He was acting out of sheer terror. As darkness settled over the lake, Marcus found an old blanket and rope from the storage room. He wrapped Darren's body carefully, his hands trembling as he tied the knots. Lena couldn't bear to watch, turning away as tears streamed down her face. Kayla whispered that this would only make things worse, but Marcus ignored her. He was lost in a fog of guilt and desperation, moving mechanically like a man who had already accepted his fate. When everything was ready, he told them they would carry the body to the lake. The night was cold and quiet, the only sound coming from the gentle rippling of the water. The moonlight cast faint reflections across the surface, making the lake look like a dark mirror. The three of them moved through the trees in silence, the weight of the body dragging them down both physically and emotionally. Lena stumbled several times, her sobs muffled against the sound of their footsteps. Marcus didn't speak. He just kept walking, his face pale and blank. When they reached the shore, the wind picked up, rustling through the reeds. Marcus waded into the shallow water, pulling the body behind him. The cold bit at his skin, but he didn't feel it. He was too far gone, consumed by the moment. He tied a few heavy stones to the blanket before letting go. The body sank slowly, disappearing beneath the dark water with barely a ripple. The lake swallowed the evidence in silence. For a moment, everything was still again. Lena fell to her knees, shaking uncontrollably. Kayla turned away, covering her face with her hands. Marcus stood there in the water, staring at the ripples as if expecting Darren to rise again. The wind blew harder, carrying the faint scent of pine and rain, but nothing could wash away the weight pressing down on them. When they finally returned to the cabin, none of them spoke. The place felt colder now, emptier. The walls seemed to close in around them. Hours passed before Marcus realized Kayla was gone. Her bag was missing, and her car keys were no longer on the counter. Panic surged through him. He ran to the window and saw tire marks leading down the muddy road. She had left without a word, and he knew exactly where she was going. Lena looked terrified when he told her. She tried to calm him down, saying maybe Kayla wouldn't tell anyone, but they both knew that was impossible. Kayla had seen too much. They packed their things quickly, throwing clothes and belongings into bags without order. The cabin looked like a crime scene, overturned chairs, broken glass, dark stains near the hearth. Marcus told Lena to hurry, but his voice cracked under the weight of fear. As they drove away, the tires splashed through puddles, the headlights cutting through the mist that hung over the road. Every turn of the wheels felt like an echo of guilt chasing them. An hour later, flashing lights appeared in the rearview mirror. Police cars blocked the road ahead, their red and blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement. Lena's breath caught in her throat. Marcus slowed the car, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. Officers surrounded the vehicle, shouting for them to stop. There was no escape. Kayla had gone straight to the police after leaving the cabin, telling them everything, the fight, the death, the attempt to hide the body. By the next morning, the lake was crawling with investigators. Divers found Darren's body floating near the reeds, the blanket half loosened by the water. The story spread fast. News stations swarmed the area, calling it a shocking case of jealousy turned deadly. The so-called couple swap weekend became the center of every headline. The peaceful lakeside retreat now carried a reputation soaked in blood. Marcus and Lena were taken into custody that same day. As police cars drove them away, the sky turned from gray to pale gold with the rising sun. The lake behind them shimmered quietly, betraying no sign of the horror it had hidden just hours before. The once perfect image of adventure and desire had ended in tragedy, and there was no way to undo it. What began as a reckless attempt to save a marriage had destroyed everything: love, trust, and 4 lives forever bound to one night of darkness. Detectives later pieced together the final hours of the night, but nothing could fully explain the madness that had unfolded inside the suburban home. The living room was in ruins: broken glass, overturned furniture, torn photographs, and red stains across the floor that had long dried before help arrived. Neighbors had heard nothing unusual until dawn, when a single gunshot echoed through the still air, followed by silence. Inside, 3 lives had already ended, and one was clinging to life in the corner of the room. That survivor was Grace, her white dress soaked with blood, both hers and someone else's, when police arrived. They found Ethan lying near the fireplace, a gun in his right hand, his lifeless eyes fixed on the ceiling. His best friend, Mike, was sprawled across the couch with a deep wound to the chest. Across the room, Vanessa lay motionless, her body crumpled beside the shattered coffee table. Only Grace was breathing, trembling, unable to speak, her hands shaking so violently that officers feared she would pass out before she could be questioned. The investigation began immediately, and what followed became one of the most disturbing cases the small town had ever seen. The night had started as an innocent couple's swap gathering, but ended in jealousy, rage, and betrayal so twisted that even seasoned detectives struggled to comprehend it. Every piece of evidence painted a picture of control and obsession. Ethan had set everything in motion, yet it seemed he had also been consumed by the very chaos he created. Detectives discovered Ethan's journal locked in his home office. Inside were months of entries detailing his frustrations, insecurities, and growing suspicion that Grace was no longer loyal to him. There were notes about Vanessa and Mike, two observations that revealed he had studied them, predicted their reactions, and even planned how the night might go wrong. In one chilling passage, written 2 weeks before the party, he had scrawled, "If they betray the rules, I'll end the game myself." Those words became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case later on. Grace's hospital recovery was slow. Physically, her wounds healed, but the emotional scars were far deeper. When she finally regained strength to talk, her version of events shocked everyone. She said Ethan had become obsessed with testing her loyalty after months of emotional distance. The couple swap was his idea, a way to reignite excitement or expose secrets. But what began as curiosity spiraled into violence when Ethan's jealousy flared in the middle of the night. According to Grace, he had accused Vanessa and Mike of breaking his trust, yelling that they had gone too far. A struggle broke out, and the first gunshot followed soon after. Ballistic reports confirmed the gun belonged to Ethan. It had his fingerprints, and traces of his skin under the trigger guard. But there was something else. Mike's blood was found on the weapon too, suggesting he had tried to wrestle it away. The fight had lasted several minutes, with furniture smashed and blood trails leading from room to room. Grace's wounds came from trying to intervene, while Vanessa was caught in the chaos and struck by a fatal shot. Ethan had then turned the gun on himself. As the town absorbed the horror, the media turned it into a national spectacle. The phrase, "Couple S swap gone wrong," became a headline that drew millions of viewers and endless online debates. Psychologists were invited to comment on how obsession and insecurity could twist into something deadly. Friends of the couples came forward, describing how both marriages had seemed happy on the surface, but had been crumbling beneath private secrets. Ethan's co-workers mentioned how withdrawn he had become in recent months, spending hours scrolling through social media and checking Grace's online activity. Police reports also revealed that Grace had been planning to leave Ethan after discovering his tracking devices hidden in her car and phone. She had confided in Vanessa about it, unaware that her words would later become the motive behind a massacre. Ethan's mind had unraveled long before the fateful night, but no one noticed the extent of his paranoia. Even when he suggested the couple swap, Grace thought it was just another one of his wild ideas to save their marriage. She never imagined it was a trap designed to expose betrayal and punish everyone involved. In the weeks following the tragedy, Grace faced both sympathy and suspicion. Many couldn't understand how she had survived when everyone else had died. Internet forums filled with conspiracy theories claiming she had known more than she admitted. But forensic evidence cleared her of wrongdoing. Her blood loss, defensive wounds, and trauma were consistent with her account. Still, the guilt of survival haunted her. She moved away quietly after the trial ended, leaving behind a house forever marked by death. Detectives closed the case with the conclusion that Ethan had orchestrated the night's events under the illusion of control. But when emotions exploded, he lost grip on reality. The swap was never about fun or trust. It was a twisted experiment born from insecurity and obsession. His need to dominate turned fatal when jealousy consumed him completely. Years later, the story became the subject of a true crime documentary. Viewers were drawn to the mystery of what truly happened behind closed doors. Some believed Ethan's rage was spontaneous, others thought it was premeditated. But one detail remained chillingly clear. Every choice that night had led step by step toward destruction. The final moments, as described by Grace, were the most haunting of all. The house had gone silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. She had crawled across the floor toward Ethan, pleading for him to stop, though he couldn't hear her through his fury. When the last shot rang out, she said the sound didn't feel real, just a hollow echo marking the end of everything they once were. Long after the case was closed, neighbors said they still heard strange noises from the empty house. Some swore the lights flickered at odd hours. Others claimed to see shadows move past the windows. Whether imagination or something else, no one stayed there for long. The house was finally demolished a few years later, leaving only an empty lot and an unspoken warning about how far human desire and jealousy can go. In the end, the couple-s swap game that was meant to bring excitement had destroyed 4 lives and left behind a lesson soaked in tragedy. When love turns into obsession, there are no winners, only ghosts that never stop whispering about the night the game went too far.